Hi guys, Ryu here, and in this video we're going to be talking about composite rules. So composite is an image that it's basically created out of multiple images. So if you look at this image here, I'm going to alt click on this layer here, and that is basically a render from Blender. That's the raw render. And this is, everything on top of it was created in Photoshop using layers, and we call it a composite image. I added some planet, added some jet streams, some mist, etc. And also there is a horizon here in the back. If you can see that, but if I'm gonna turn it off and on, you're probably gonna be able to notice it, right? See that? There's a horizon here. So that's a composite image. Now, to be able to create a composite image and make it believable, you really need to follow certain rules, and they're not important, they're essential, okay? See, our brains are trained by years and years of walking outside or looking at things indoors, wherever. And we know how light works. We subconsciously know how sunlight works, how diffuse sunlight works, how elevation works. So when you're gonna, for example, squat, the horizon is gonna pop up. If you're going to jump, the horizon is gonna go down, etc. So we know these things intuitively, but when you see an image on the internet and something is wrong with it, your brain will tell you that, it's just something is not right, but you can't put your finger on it. So hopefully after this video, you will know exactly what's the problem and, be able to create amazing images. Now I have a really cool video on YouTube that analyzes an image from Land Rover Japan. And I was talking about a flagship model over there being presented in a horrendous render that was just fake to the boot, and I basically talked about all the problems over there, mismatched shadows and all that. And if you haven't seen the video, go ahead and watch it. It's gonna give you some really interesting insight, and you're probably gonna realize a lot of things. So in this course I made one interesting mistake, and that was with basically with shadows. If you go here to this final render from the course, if you watch this part already, because I've mentioned it. But I made a mistake, crucial mistake with shadows. If you look at this vessel landing gear, it's actually hovering above the ground, and I didn't notice it because of these windows of this sunlight. I was literally fooled by the sunlight here, and there's a massive clash between the sunlight and shadowy part here, right? And this landing gear was kind of looking like it's, kind of rested on the ground. So I genuinely was fooled. And I did the whole image, and I realized at the end when I was trying to darken down this part, I was like, holy shit, that's actually above the ground. So I re-rendered the whole thing and I re-edited it. And I want you to pay attention now. I'm going to flip between these images and, see the difference, right? See, that's on the ground, that's above the ground, okay? On the ground, above the ground, right? So what I've done is, I went here and I wanted to darken this part, and that's when I've noticed the problem. I was like, damn. So I re-rendered the whole thing. So be careful with this, because these small things can creep up on you, and you're gonna finish a really long work, and then you're gonna be like, holy goddamn, I've missed that. But it happens to everyone. So there you go. So let's talk about this image, and let's talk about rules of composite. So here are the rules of composites, talking about shadows, colors, hue, saturation, brightness, angle and elevation of camera, perspective, scale, sharpness, composition, and also light direction, but that's kind of related to shadows. Let's talk about this image and let's talk about shadows, right? If you talk about shadows, you need to talk about light direction as well, because we have different types of lights. So if you haven't seen the theoretical part of this course, go ahead and watch it about lighting, because that's when I explain all the details in terms of, what's a diffuse light, what's a direct light, what's a hard light, etc. Okay, that's really important to know. Now in this case, we have kind of a hard / diffuse light, because we have a hard light of sun, but it's diffused by the atmosphere and also by the dust. So the shadow is going to be kind of defined, but also diffused. If you look at here, these shadows are pretty well defined, but at the same time, they're kind of softish. They're not really that dark, right? But if you want to go, for example, to this kind of an image, which is Abandoned Slipaway, one of my favorite HDRIs from polyheaven.com, you literally see no shadows, other than here, because everything is so diffused, because the light falls from every single angle, because the sky is one massive softbox, right? Whereas in here you have a very defined source of light, and it's really small relatively to the scene, okay? So the shadow is going to be defined. Also, the light is really low, okay? So the angle is going to be steep, meaning you're going to have long shadows, right? So when you want to add something to your scene, afterwards, you really need to make sure that you're going to paint these shadows manually and they're going to match, okay? So that's one. So for example, if when I was creating these, streams of jet fog or whatever the hell it's called, jet streams, I needed to make them bright because I knew they're going to be backlit by the sun, okay? Backlit by the sun, which means they're going to pop. So they're going to be really, really bright. So they needed to be way brighter than the background. If I made them dark, it wouldn't work because it would not look natural, because we're kind of looking through that steam, against the sun, if you know what I mean. So, okay, so go outside, for example, and find some place when there is a smoke or some steam raising from some pipes, and look against the light. And when you look against the light and with the light, you will see that the fog's going to become way bright when you look against the light, and it's going to become darker when you look with the light. The same with an incense, okay? Just shine a light onto like a smoke coming from an incense, and you will know how it looks. So you need to, observe either nature or outside, or look at photographs and references to understand how light works, right? So then you can apply it to your images, because you need to create this from scratch. It doesn't exist, right? If I go back to this image again, this doesn't exist. I need to paint it, right? So you need to know how it looks, okay? Then let's talk about colors. This is really important. When you drop something into your image, like for example, I was dropping the planet, or you drop something that's of a different color or different saturation, you need to match the color. Let's say I wanted to drop something into this image like a ship, right? Second element would be color, but we're going to be talking about color, saturation, brightness at the same time, because they're kind of related, okay? In fact, all of these elements sort of are interconnected, okay? But let's talk about these few elements at once. So let's talk about brightness first, and sort of a light direction. You see that the light direction in this image doesn't match, because if you look at the shadows on the ship, you can reconstruct where the light is coming from. The light is coming somewhere from here on the left hand side, because the top is bright and the bottom is dark. You got shadows here, and the top is kind of lit, reflections here. The back here is darker than the front, which means the light comes from somewhere here. So, first of all, what we need to do is kind of flip it around. That's a little bit better. But now we got the darkness problem, okay? Because the darkest element on this image is darker than the darkest element on the composite here. So what I would need to do is I would need to brighten it up. So let's click here, add some curves or levels, it doesn't matter. I'll click here to clip it, and we're gonna grab this point here and bring it up, okay? By the way, if at any point you create a point here on this graph and you want to get rid of it, just drag it outside of the frame, it's going to disappear. Okay, so this is a little bit better, but now we have a problem that it just doesn't match in terms of colors. So what you could do is go here to, blue tones, and you could inject some warm tones into the shadows and also highlights and make it a little bit warmer. But now it's maybe too saturated. So what you need to do is go to hue and saturation, clip it, right? Drop the saturation, okay? And improve the vibrance. And you're getting somewhere, right? You're getting somewhere. So this is a little bit better than the previous, the original image. But now, let's say we wanted to put it somewhere here in the background, okay? And, so the ship is kind of going through the atmosphere somewhere in the back, somewhere there. So we need to match the scale, okay? We need to match the scale. And also we need to match, again, the darkness, of the image, because it's way too dark, right? Doesn't make any sense. So again, let's go back here to curves, right? And let's go to this RGB and let's lift it, even more. So let's, completely wash it out. Another trick that you can use a color from the scene to cast it on the vessel. So create a new layer, clip it here, press B for brush, Alt click to select the color, Alt delete, and then switch the layer here to color. And then drop this, drop the opacity to, inject some kind of a warm color over there. This is way too saturated again, so we're gonna add another saturation level, right? And we're gonna drop the saturation, okay? And increase the vibrance a little bit, okay? This again is still way too dark, so let's grab some levels this time and clip it. You need to manipulate with these handles here to basically adjust the levels of the ship. So we could drop the, midtones a bit like this, and we could inject a bit of brightness in highlights, and this is going to be looking a little bit better, right? And now what we need to do, we need to drop the opacity a little bit, because this is way too strong, right? So we're gonna drop the opacity a little bit to blend it even better with the background. So it looks a little bit better, but it's still too dark, it's still too dark. So what I would do, I would still add more of these curves and clip them, right? Change it to luminosity, so it affects only luminosity, but doesn't affect saturation. And now drop it even further, okay? So it's really washed out, right? Put a bit more warmth into these tones, so a bit more yellow, right? Although we need to create new curves because this one doesn't affect color, I forgot. So let's add another curve layer and clip it, and then go to blue and inject some yellows again into highlights. Go to reds, inject some reds, right? A bit of cyans in the shadows, and it's gonna start looking really cool. Then you need to match the sharpness, which means we need to blur it, because look at the background. The background here is blurred. It's kind of, hazy and fuzzy. So we need to blur it. So let's go here to filter, and, we could blur it. Before you blur it, you make sure that this object is actually a smart object. So what you want to do is right click here and convert to smart object. My object is actually already a smart object. So what I can do is rasterize a layer, which will remove the effect, but you want to convert it to smart object here. And now you want to add some blur to it, okay? So go to blur, and let's go with Gaussian blur, and we're going to add a little bit of Gaussian blur. We could add motion blur as well. One of them will do, right? So a bit of blur here, so it's kind of blurrish, right, in the background. We're going to create another layer here, clip it, right? Let's go to brushes, and let's grab like a smoke brush, okay? So let's go here. Not this one. One of these. There we go. And we're gonna select, this kind of like a sandy tone here. And we're going to kind of paint it all over this vessel here like this. And you kind of drop opacity a little bit, So it's gonna kind of become as kind of like a sandy as this dune, because there is a sand raising from this desert, and you can see the sun. There's a little bit of sand, all over the place here, right? So you can add it to this vessel, and this starts looking really as if it belonged to the scene, okay? And if you wanted to bring it even further, you could just create another layer, and I'll show you a really cool trick. You can grab the color from the sun here, select this brush here, and what we're gonna do is we're going to paint, okay? So we're going to select this vessel, control click. You can paint here, okay, with this bright tone. So select it from the sun, paint it, here on the top. You could do this with like a pen tool or a Wacom tablet, whatever. What you want to do is paint around these elements here on the front, and then Control D, and you want to change this to kind of like linear dodge, and drop the opacity and just increase it a little bit. So what it will do, it will add kind of like a glow around the front of the vessel, which will imitate the rimline. But you need to be really precise, okay? Like, just a smidgen, just the very edge of it. I just was, very sloppy with it, but you get the point. And this, this will make sure that this vessel fits into this environment, and, it doesn't look fake, okay? So you need to take all these elements into consideration and do it in layers. Be patient, and the more patient you are, the better result you're gonna get, okay? Well, the next one's gonna be perspective, and that's really important. Perspective kind of goes with the angle and elevation of the camera. So if you think about it, there are different angles you can shoot from, okay? For example, this image was from the eye level, actually from the nose level, okay? So it's kind of like this vessel here, kind of similar, similar perspective. But if we're gonna go, for example, to this image that was shot from the top, which means I'm standing above the model and she's laying on the ground, right? So that's, that's shooting downwards. That was shot almost upwards, okay? So that was shot a little bit from the kind of like a lip level. So it shot a little bit upwards. And this one, for instance, was shot really upwards. So I was kind of like on the, thigh level, and I was shooting up. So you got different angles and different perspective, and also different focal length. And that's really important. And when you add images to your scene, you need to make sure that their perspective, the way they were shot, the angle and the elevation of the camera and the focal length matches the one in your image. So this image, for example, this scene was shot, I think, with 35 millimeters, right? So if I added something in the front here that was shot with a very long lens, and it was really compressed in terms of a view, then it will not match, because the wide angle will create different angles of objects. It's going to be much more open, kind of a wide. Then if I'm going to go to photography example again, I'll show you a difference. So if you go, for example, to architecture, right? Image like this, right, was shot with a very wide lens. And you can see the distortion here. This was like, I think, 80 millimeters or something. Look at the distortions, they're insane, okay? It's literally like sort of almost a fisheye level, okay, of the lens. If I were to put an image that was shot with a very, very long lens into that scene, it would literally not match, because it would just make no bloody sense. Like this one, for example, was shot with a longer lens, because you can see the compression effect on the architecture, okay? Not a wide angle, that probably was like 85 millimeters or something, okay? So you cannot match these two types of images together, because it will not work. So when you're going to be adding images to your scene, make sure that they match in terms of angle, perspective, and focal length. Now, sometimes it's really difficult to understand, when you look at the image on the internet or whatever, what focal length it was shot with, but do some practice, do some renders, and you can, change in Blender focal length, and you can manipulate with the lens. So let me show you here the difference. So I'm going to grab a cube, and I'm going to grab a plane, and I'm going to drop it down and rotate this cube like this, right? I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to add a camera, okay? And I'm going to move it somewhere here, okay? Like this, right? Then I'm going to change the focal length, and look what happens. This is 50 millimeters, okay? Which means that is basically how we as humans see the world. That's a natural focal length. Our eyes see more or less at 50 mil. This is why, for example, with street photography is usually shot at 50 millimeters to make it look natural, okay? If I'm going to change it to 28, which is, for example, something I'll be using for shooting interiors, you're going to get this kind of a distortion. You see that distortion? Like the angles are coming outwards, like on this image here. This is literally the same thing. And I think I was using the like 18 millimeter lens. So let's go to 18, right? Okay, see what I mean? Now when I'm going to switch it to, let's say, 200, okay? So let's say 200. You'll see what kind of perspective collapse you're going to receive. Look at this. This is compression, okay? That's how you, for example, shoot images, okay? Like, I think it's under urban. Let me show you. It's a really cool image, and this shows very well the compression. It was shot with like a 200 mil lens. This one, okay? Look at the compression in this image. It compresses everything, okay? It makes everything appear so close, because that's what long lens does. It just makes things look almost orthographic, like there's no perspective, okay? It collapses things, you understand? So when you're going to match these things, you need to really make sure that they kind of close in terms of focal length and also elevation, because the way you move your camera, it will affect your image. You need to make sure that camera angle matches. So let's say that I drop the camera really low to the ground, and my object is going to be somewhere in the top. But when I'm going to move my camera up here, okay, my object is going to be in the bottom, and also horizon is going to shift, because imagine that the horizon is somewhere over there, okay? So I'm going to shift D that, and I'm going to make this my horizon, okay? So when I'm going to be shooting from a low angle here, so I'm going to drop my camera down and shoot from a low angle, horizon is going to go up. But if I'm going to move my camera, up like this, right? my horizon is going to drop. You see what I mean? So when you go up, horizon goes down, and when you go down, horizon goes up. So you need to make sure that this camera elevation and angle, so you're shooting up, level, or from the top, matches your main image. So if this ship was shot from the top, this wouldn't work. So, you know, I needed to add this kind of an image here because otherwise it wouldn't match. This is gonna be a good example. Okay, look at this. This wouldn't make any bloody sense, right? Because first of all, this is shot from the bottom. Secondly, this is shot with a longer lens because you can see there is a, you know, there is a compression, and this is not a wide angle lens, so it doesn't match. And you know, the light doesn't match, but it's a different story. And also, you know, camera is coming from the bottom, right? So it's a low angle shot. This one is a top angle because we're shooting from some kind of a hill down onto this desert, right? So this ship here in the background would make, you know, zero sense. This makes zero sense unless you're gonna put it somewhere above the camera. So if you're gonna put it here, that makes no sense. But look at this, when I'm gonna be shifting it higher and higher, now it starts making sense because we are above the camera. So you see, you cannot trick the eyes. The eyes will always tell you that something is fake, okay? So make sure that camera elevation, okay, focal length and perspective and all that matches, because it's very important, right? Now the scale is not a thing, you know. You need to match the scale, but we were talking about it when we were actually adding this vessel. You know, if I add something that's, you know, off the scale, so let's say I would add a human that's, you know, like as high as this pillar, that would just make no sense because these planes would look like toys. So you need to match the scale of whatever you put into your image to make it believable, otherwise it's going to look fake, right? And the last thing is composition. When you add something to your image, you need to make sure that it fits, okay? So if I, for example, grab this vessel, right, and I'm going to move this vessel, right, let's say somewhere, I don't know, you know, somewhere here, okay, like this, right, or even like this, right, it's just not gonna make any sense because the composition is off. You want to position it in a place where it's gonna be actually making sense in terms of composition, so it's gonna match with all the other elements in your scene. Like for instance, here we could add some kind of like a landing pad, it would fit, but if I add it in here, it would just make no sense. So again, composition is important, and you need to make sure that these elements, you know, fit in terms of a theme. So if I added, for example, some kind of a roller coaster ride here from a Disney, you know, land, it just wouldn't work, right? It wouldn't make any sense. If I added some cisterns or some kind of like a, you know, I don't know, refinery, sci-fi refinery, that would fit. But, you know, where would you put it, right? You need to find a place for it to make it work. Also, you need to match light and, you know, other elements. So anyway, guys, this is it for composite rules. So make sure they, you know, you follow them, because that's the only way to make your images look believable. And it's gonna take some time to practice them. So, you know, don't be shy. You're gonna make mistakes, but that's okay. Like I told you, everyone makes mistakes. I made a mistake, a rookie mistake in this case. You know, probably I moved the floor or I moved the vessel by mistake and I didn't notice it. And, you know, and that happened. So don't make the same mistake. And so, you know, be very cautious and conscious when you're creating these images, because the more work and the more care and love you put into them, the more believable your images will be. Well, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next video.